Good evening, everybody. My name is Gabriel Motzkin. I'm the director of this establishment of the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute, and it's my pleasure to greet you at this conference. And I want to say something about how this all came about, because it started out with a conversation between me and Yfaat Weiss when we thought that it would be a good thing to try to figure out what had German funding in the humanities done in Israel, and what, at the same time, the fact that so many Germans came here, what had that done to German academic culture, or to the perception of Israel, or to the understanding of German Jewish history in Germany. So it's a two-way exchange. Now, this two-way exchange, I think, is an instance of a larger question, which we will not answer in this conference, but I think you should know what it is, which is, does funding have any effect on culture or not? And that's a big question. You know, people fund great projects, spend a lot of money doing something, and it's not at all clear that that's the way culture develops. That now, in a way, this example is a special example because here it obviously made a difference, but we cannot specify quite what that difference is. When I first came back to Israel as a 14-year-old in 1960, and I had sort of pseudo-intellectual pretensions, the culture which I saw around me was French culture. People were very interested in what happened in Paris, and Paris had its effect here. And when I came back many years later, in 1982, for my first postdoc, that situation had changed because there was relatively little French government funding, and there was a great deal of German government funding, and that meant that a younger generation was trained in German history and literature with varying success. The German Köbner Zentrum, Center for German History, was notably one of the successful centers. As opposed to that, I was a member of the German department, but there was always the feeling that we lived in an enclave of German culture and did not necessarily have much effect outside of that German department. And I'm sure the same is true of institutions in Tel Aviv and Haifa as well, and that is one of the interesting things about this comparison. Now, when we talked about this, but it's not true, the German department did have one great success, and this was, of course, the Rosenzweig Center, which was founded to help out the German department and then developed other interests as well, and that had more of an effect on the scholars who came here and then went back to Germany. So that had an immediate and large effect. Now, to my mind, this is an extraordinarily interesting issue. It's one that I hope we discuss in detail in the next couple of days. I hope we find out something about this. And I want to tell you something about the genesis of how this happened. And I'll abuse your patience for 1.5 more minutes, which is this, that Yfaat and I, when we talked about it, it came to my mind that if we just submitted an application to the Deutsche Forschungsgemeinschaft, the German research organization, it would probably not do too well because of the way those projects are structured and how they are evaluated. So I suggested to Yfaat that we go directly to the Bundesministerium für Bildung und Forschung, to the German Ministry for Culture and Research, and that we suggest to them that, after all, wouldn't they like to know how their funding had been effective? Had their funding been effective? They bought this idea. They bought this idea, and that is why this project, of which this is one of the conferences, was established. It's a three-way cooperation between the Fritz Bauer Institute at the University of Frankfurt, the Rosenzweig Center at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. We're three co-directors. We have the young and exciting scholars who work in the project, Dr. Auer and Dr. Hesterman, who work on this, and we think that this is a project that has a lot of potential for the future, and we will be doing several conferences within the framework of this conference. And I want to say one more other thing. one of the things that happens in life is that the immediate past is the past that is first forgotten. So something we don't know because we think Holocaust, First World War, everything else. If you try to explore the lives of people who were alive in 1950, this is almost harder than exploring the life of people who were alive in 1850, because people barely remember them. So you're caught with the archival materials. And this oblivion of the recent past is something that we hope to fight against in that we interview people and talk to people who are living parts of the establishment of this cooperation, because this cooperation itself, so we think, is an important part of our cultural, historical past. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Professor Yfaat Weiss, my close friend, to say a few words and to greet you, and then she will lead you into the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
So thank you, Gabi, for sharing with everyone how we succeeded as salesmen. But I'll do it a little bit formally. Okay. There is generally no need to justify one's choice of topic. Certainly not if it is of interest, and particularly if it promises innovation. Topics inherently justify themselves, all the more so if they respond to a feeling that relies on one's cumulative professional experience, a feeling that has not been systematically examined and is as nothing but an intuitive good feeling. Yet in the Israeli-German or German-Israeli sphere, this good feeling at times appears to be something real enough. Israeli-German relations elicit far-reaching interpretations, heaps of interpretations, in fact, that rest upon impressions, and it seems as though there are very many who have formed some impression or another, and that many others show an interest in them. It would also appear that we ourselves, who have served in the past or currently serve as a connecting link between Germany and Israel, between the humanities here and there, are burdened with impressions. We find the scientific ties growing warmer and then cooling, becoming stronger and then relaxing. We are not exempt from general impressions and on occasion tend to build a general principle from a single experience. We have a limited stock of empirical knowledge. At most, we are familiar with a few numbers and statistics, and mostly not even that. It was our fundamental curiosity, as we just heard, that led us to draft our initial ideas for these projects 3 years ago. Through practicing our profession, we came to recognize the importance of the close scientific ties between Israel and Germany, and through contacts with our colleagues in our departments and through our administrative duties, we could appreciate the particularly heavy investment made by Germany in Israel's humanities compared to every other country, including the United States. But does investment in fact make an impact? And if it does, how does one assess this kind of influence? Does the extent point to substance, and if so, how does one estimate its depth? Can one identify a clear interest in scientific export, and does such intent come to fruition? Do the founding bodies in Germany always share a common interest with Israel's scientific establishment, which uses these funds to direct policy and scientific development in the local universities? Are the intentions explicitly stated, or are they implicit? Are these issues subject to negotiation? And if so, are they negotiated directly or indirectly, and with what measure of success? To this lengthy catalogue of questions, which is by and large pertinent to bilateral scientific relations in general, one may add other queries associated with the special attributes of these relations. In our context, so they said, these are not relations between the foreign and the familiar, but rather an encounter of substances that were in part linked in the past and have remained connected to each other through the threads of entwined traditions that were severed as a result of Nazism, exiling of the spirit, and the annihilation of European Jewry. Within the humanities in general, and in the sphere of history and literature that lie at the core of our project, we proceeded from the assumption that we were dealing with the export of German science to scientific milieus that were rooted in the German tradition and in some cases remained committed to the German and Jewish German traditions. It is the affinity on the one hand and the rupture on the other hand that generated the tension that underlies this fresh encounter, and it is they that make the case under discussion an object of comparison and at the same time rendered it a truly singular event. So who were the major protagonists? We asked ourselves what personally motivated the various players, the Israelis on the one hand and the Germans on the other. We first turned to the records for an answer, but beyond them sought guidance from colleagues in the use of the tools of oral history, namely of interviews. These were to fill in the gaps of knowledge that remained unrecorded, but would also enrich the picture, reveal ambivalent emotions that had surely arisen during the process, and enable us to take a retrospective perspective. In these turbulent days in Israel and in Germany alike, the issue of scientific ties may seem somewhat marginal. Yet, nevertheless, literature and history constitute the foundations of national identity. They are integral to the tension between the universal and the particular and form a major stratum within the humanities. While we may have come to recognize the limitations of the concept of Bildung and of enlightenment, I presume that we still appreciate the role of these disciplines in the creation of fundamental values and attribute some weight to our endeavors and their indirect impact on the conceptual world and the discourse that surrounded us. It is in this spirit that I wish to thank all the participants gathered here and wish us all stimulating lectures and fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.